I found the ring on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind where sunlight drips slowly through the kitchen curtains and everything smells faintly of coffee and the past. It was in the pocket of my son's jeans, the ones I was folding absent-mindedly while the radio hummed some old tune about love and second chances. At first, I thought it was a coin, something forgotten from the laundry, something ordinary. But when my fingers brushed against the cold curve of metal, I knew it wasn't. It was heavier, meaningful. When I pulled it out, the world tilted for just a moment. A wedding ring. Simple. Worn smooth at the edges, as if someone had held onto it for years. My son's jeans, my son's pocket. My son, who hadn't spoken of love in 3 years. I sat down, the denim still warm from the dryer, the ring glinting in my palm like an accusation. I turned it between my fingers, searching for an engraving, a clue, something. And there it was, faint but clear, to M, forever yours. My breath caught. M, for Michael. My son. But the rest, the mystery, wasn't about him. It was about whoever had given it to him. Forever yours. A promise I thought had been buried long ago. Michael had stopped wearing rings after the accident. He used to have one, his engagement ring, matched to hers. He never told me where he'd put it, and I never asked. Some things, when you love someone, you leave untouched. But now here it was, a new ring, a different one, hidden like a secret he hadn't wanted to share. And I felt that strange mix of worry and curiosity only a mother knows, the one that whispers, "Something's not right, but don't make him shut down." I placed the ring on the table and stared at it as if it might explain itself. The morning light crawled across it slowly, and in that shine, I saw everything I'd been afraid of for years, his loneliness, his guilt, his silence. After the accident, Michael had changed. The laughter that used to fill the house was gone. The music stopped. He moved through rooms like a ghost, gentle, polite, distant. The kind of quiet that doesn't ask for help, but breaks your heart anyway. I used to hear him pacing at night, talking softly to someone who wasn't there. I pretended not to notice. When I asked him once if he ever thought of dating again, he smiled, one of those sad, polite smiles, and said, "Mom, some things aren't meant to be repeated." And that was the end of it. Until now. I looked out the window, the world so normal it felt unfair. Children riding bikes. A dog barking. A couple walking hand in hand. And here I was, holding a mystery that belonged to my own child. I thought about putting it back, pretending I hadn't seen it, but something inside me, maybe guilt, maybe instinct, told me I needed to understand. Not out of curiosity, but love. Because the thing no one tells you about motherhood is that it never stops. You never stop wanting to protect, even from the shadows. When Michael came down later, his hair messy, his eyes tired, I studied him like a detective. He poured coffee, thanked me, smiled faintly. He was 32 now, still handsome in that quiet, serious way. But there was something softer about him lately, like he'd been carrying a secret that both hurt and healed him. I waited until he sat, then I spoke. "Michael," I said gently, "I found something in your pocket." He froze. His hand stopped midair, mug halfway to his lips. "What do you mean?" I placed the ring on the table between us. For a moment, neither of us breathed. The look on his face wasn't guilt, it was something more complicated. Shock, maybe. Fear. Then he reached out slowly, as if the ring were fragile. He didn't touch it right away. He just stared. "Where did you?" His voice cracked. "Mom, you weren't supposed to see that." I tried to smile. "I was doing laundry. It wasn't on purpose." He looked away, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "It's not what you think." "I'm not thinking anything," I lied. "But you can tell me. Please." He sighed, long and heavy, the kind that carries 3 years of unspoken words. "It's complicated." "I'm your mother," I said softly. "Complicated is what I do." For a long time, there was silence between us. Only the ticking of the old wall clock filled the space. Finally, he spoke. "It's hers," he said quietly. "The ring." I knew who her was without needing to ask. Emma. The woman he was supposed to marry. The one who died in that car crash 3 years ago. The accident that broke him. The one that stole his light. She was wearing it. I whispered. He nodded. I thought it was gone. The police said they couldn't find her ring after everything. I didn't ask for details. I couldn't. His voice trembled. A few weeks ago, someone mailed it to me. No return address. Just this ring. I don't know who or why. I reached for his hand. Maybe someone found it at the site? Maybe, he said, staring at the gold band as if it were alive. But it doesn't feel like that. There was a note inside the package. It said, "She wanted you to have this when you were ready." My heart twisted. Oh, Michael. I don't know what it means. I don't even know if it's real. He finally looked at me, his eyes wet but steady. But for the first time, when I held it, I didn't feel crushed. I felt peace. Like she was still with me somehow. I didn't know what to say. There are moments as a mother when words are useless, when all you can do is listen, breathe, and love. I reached across the table and closed his fingers around the ring. Maybe that's what she wanted, I said. For you to let her memory heal you, not haunt you. He smiled faintly, tears sliding down his cheeks. You think so? I know so. He stayed quiet, turning the ring over and over in his hands. And in that sunlight, something changed in him. The shadows softened. The guilt seemed lighter. For the first time in years, I saw my son, not the broken version of him, but the boy who used to laugh, who used to dream. Later that day, he asked if I wanted to visit the lake, the one he and Emma used to go to. We hadn't been there since the funeral. I said yes. We drove in silence, the road winding through memories. The lake was still the same, calm, endless, surrounded by pines. He stood by the water, holding the ring in his palm. The wind picked up, carrying whispers of the past. And then he said, almost to himself, maybe it's time to say goodbye properly. He walked to the edge and gently placed the ring in the water. It caught the sunlight one last time before sinking beneath the ripples. He didn't cry. He just smiled, a small, peaceful smile. When he turned to me, his eyes were clear. I think she'd want me to live again, he said. To stop holding on to ghosts. I nodded, unable to speak. And that night, for the first time in 3 years, I heard him humming in his room. A soft tune. Hopeful. Alive. I sat by the window, watching the stars, and realized something I hadn't before. Grief doesn't end, it transforms. It becomes part of you, like a scar that doesn't hurt anymore but reminds you where you've been. And I thought about that ring, how it found its way back to him, how maybe love has its own mysterious way of returning when we're finally ready. I smiled. Maybe that's what forever really means. It's strange, the way silence feels after a long storm. 4 months after that day at the lake, our home breathed differently. The air felt lighter, the walls no longer heavy with unspoken pain. Sometimes, I would find Michael sitting on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset, his eyes following the line where sky met earth, as if he was tracing a border between what was and what could still be. He didn't talk much about that day, but I could see it in his face. Something inside him had shifted. He started painting again. That was the first sign. Before the accident, he used to paint landscapes, wild skies, distant horizons, quiet lakes that looked like mirrors. After Emma's death, his brushes went dry. They stayed in a box in the attic for 3 years, collecting dust. Then one morning, I woke up to the faint smell of turpentine and saw the back door open. The light in the backyard was soft and golden, and there he was, in front of a blank canvas, his hands trembling just a little. He didn't notice me. I didn't disturb him. I just watched, tears in my eyes, as the first color touched the white again. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was alive. We began talking more, in small steps, little conversations over coffee, old jokes that returned shyly, laughter that felt uncertain but genuine. It was like learning to breathe again. Some days, he would tell me stories about Emma, about their plans, their silly fights, their dreams. I listened, holding every word as if it were fragile. And then one day, out of nowhere, he said, "Mom, do you ever feel like love never really dies? It just changes shape." I looked at him, his face half in shadow. "Yes," I said softly. "It doesn't die. It becomes something else, Quieter, maybe, but still there. He nodded. That's how it feels now. A few weeks later, he told me he'd started volunteering at a local art center. He was helping teach painting to children from nearby schools. When he said it, I almost didn't believe him, not because he wasn't capable, but because I hadn't heard that tone in his voice for so long. Excitement, purpose. He came home one evening with paint on his shirt and stories in his eyes, and I couldn't stop smiling. That's when he mentioned her, Clara. He spoke about her casually at first. She runs the program, he said one night while washing dishes. She's kind. You'd like her. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need to. The way he said her name told me everything. There was warmth there, and something careful, like someone holding a candle in the dark. Days passed, and I saw him changing again. Softer shoulders, lighter laughter. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at his phone, smiling. Once, I saw a message pop up when he left it on the table. Don't forget tomorrow's class. And bring that smile with you, smiley face. See. It made me happy and terrified all at once. Happy, because I wanted him to live again. Terrified, because love is fragile when it comes after loss. I didn't want him to shatter a second time. One evening, he invited me to the art center. We're doing a small exhibition, he said. You should come. When I walked in, the smell of paint and paper filled the room. Children's drawings lined the walls, messy, beautiful explosions of color. In the center, surrounded by easels and laughter, stood Michael. And next to him was a woman with dark hair tied in a loose bun, paint on her hands, and a smile that seemed to reach right into people's hearts. That was Clara. She noticed me before he did. You must be his mother, she said warmly, wiping her hands on her apron before shaking mine. He talks about you all the time. I smiled, surprised. Does he? All the time, she said, glancing at him affectionately. He said you taught him to see beauty in everything, even broken things. My throat tightened. That sounds like him. Throughout the evening, I watched them together. The way he looked at her when she laughed, the way her hand brushed his shoulder when they talked, it was subtle, respectful, but full of life. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. Maybe Emma's love hadn't left him to vanish. Maybe it had stayed, guiding him toward this, toward someone who could remind him that life still had color. After the exhibition, we walked home under the quiet hum of streetlights. He didn't say anything about her, but his silence was full of meaning. Finally, I said, she's lovely. He smiled. She is. And she makes you smile again. He nodded, looking ahead. I didn't think I could, Mom. I didn't think it was possible. Sometimes, I said softly, it's not about replacing the love we lost. It's about remembering that we still deserve to feel it. He squeezed my hand gently. Thank you for not giving up on me. I wanted to tell him that mothers don't give up. Not ever. But instead, I just smiled through my tears. Weeks turned into months, and I watched my son blossom in a way I hadn't seen in years. He and Clara grew closer, and the laughter in our house returned. Not the same laughter as before, but something new, tender, and warm. They'd cook together sometimes, bringing food over for me, and I'd watch them teasing each other in the kitchen like teenagers. It was beautiful to see, and bittersweet. And yet, there was still something about that ring that lingered in my mind. The way it had arrived. The note. The timing. It was too strange to ignore. Sometimes, I'd wake up at night and wonder, who sent it? Why then? One morning, while Michael was out teaching, I decided to look again at the package it came in. He had left it in a drawer in his studio. I wasn't snooping, not really. I just wanted closure. I found a small white box, the wrapping still folded inside, and tucked under the corner was something I hadn't noticed before. A small piece of folded paper, separate from the note. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, soft and looping. He wasn't ready then. But he is now. She wanted him to remember love, not loss. No name. No address. Just that. I sat there for a long time, thinking. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, the same perfume Emma used to wear. My heart raced. Could it be her mother? A friend? Someone who had kept the ring all this time? That evening, I told Michael what I'd found. He read the note in silence, then looked at me with an expression that was neither fear nor confusion, just wonder. "Do you think it was her mom?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Her mother passed away last year." "Then who?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he smiled faintly. "Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe whoever it was, they just knew it was time." And somehow, I understood. Because sometimes love doesn't come back to us in people or words. It comes back in gestures, in moments, in small miracles. Maybe that ring's journey wasn't meant to be explained. Maybe it was just life's quiet way of saying, "Go on." That night, as I watched Michael and Clara sitting on the porch together, sharing a quiet laugh, I thought about how far we'd come from that morning when I found the ring in his pocket. How something so small had opened a door that grief had sealed shut. I realized then that hope doesn't always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it slips quietly into our lives, through a ring, a letter, a stranger's kindness, and before we know it, we're breathing again. And I whispered a thank you to Emma, wherever she was. Spring came quietly that year, the kind that doesn't announce itself but simply softens everything. The mornings were no longer cold, the air smelled of earth and rain. For the first time in years, our house felt alive. There were flowers on the table again, fresh paint on the porch, and laughter that didn't sound borrowed. I used to think that grief ended like a storm, all at once, with thunder and release. But I learned it doesn't. It fades like winter snow, slowly, shyly, until one day you look up and realize the world has turned green again. Michael and Clara were inseparable by then. She came by often, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just herself. I liked her, not only because she made him smile, but because she carried the same kind of gentleness Emma once had. Different, but familiar. She wasn't trying to fill Emma's place. She was simply giving him space to be whole again. And that was exactly what he needed. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I found Michael in the garden. He was repainting the old bench under the oak tree, the one his father built years before. I stood by the doorway for a moment, watching. His sleeves were rolled up, his hands streaked with paint, his expression peaceful. "Need help?" I asked. He looked up and smiled. "You can hand me the brush cleaner, if you want." I joined him, sitting beside the paint cans, the smell of turpentine thick in the air. We talked about nothing and everything, the weather, the neighbors, the art show he and Clara were planning for the summer. Then, after a long pause, he said, "Mom, do you ever think people send us signs? Like, when we're finally ready to move on?" I hesitated. "I think they do. Sometimes we just don't notice them until later." He nodded slowly. "That's how it feels about the ring. I don't think I was meant to know who sent it. I think it just found me when it was time." I looked at him, the golden light of sunset touching his face, and I felt something settle inside me, peace. He wasn't haunted anymore. The ring had done what it came to do. A few weeks later, Clara invited me to help with the preparations for their art exhibition. The center was full of color and movement. Michael had painted a new series called Light After Rain. Every piece was full of emotion, gray skies breaking into color, trees reaching toward light. There was one canvas that stood out from the rest. It showed a small lake under a pink sky, ripples spreading from a single point at its center. "That's the day at the lake, isn't it?" I whispered. He nodded. "That's when everything started to change." I wanted to cry, but instead I smiled. "It's beautiful." When the exhibition opened, the room filled with people. Neighbors, students, families, all admiring the work. Michael moved through the crowd with an ease I hadn't seen since before the accident. Clara stood beside him, radiant, her hand resting lightly on his arm. And I realized that grief had finally loosened its grip. Toward the end of the evening, an older woman approached me. She was elegant, wearing a light gray coat and carrying a small purse. Her eyes were kind but distant, as if she'd traveled far, not just in distance but in memory. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Are you Michael's mother?" "Yes," I replied, curious. She smiled gently. "He's a wonderful artist. His work, it speaks of love that endures." "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." She hesitated, then added quietly, "I knew Emma. Years ago. I worked at the hospital where they brought her that night. My breath caught. You did. She nodded. I never forgot them. There was so much love, even in the last moments. She kept saying his name. Her eyes shimmered. When the police returned her belongings, one item was missing, a ring. I found it months later in a drawer. I wanted to send it back, but I didn't know how to reach him then. So I waited. I don't know why, something in me just said, not yet. Then, one night, I dreamed of her. She was smiling, holding out the ring, saying, "He's ready now." The next morning, I mailed it. I stood there, tears spilling silently. "Thank you," I whispered. "You gave him peace." She touched my hand gently. "No," she said. "She did." And before I could ask her name, she smiled again, that soft, knowing smile, and disappeared into the crowd. I turned and saw Michael across the room, laughing with Clara. His eyes caught mine, and for a heartbeat, it felt like Emma herself was standing beside us, smiling too. That night, when we got home, I told him what the woman had said. He didn't speak for a long while. Then he whispered, "I think I've been waiting for that story my whole life." He went quiet again, then looked up at the stars. "Mom, do you think love really finds us, even after we're gone?" "I do," I said softly. "I think it never leaves. It just changes how it reaches us." He smiled, the same smile he had as a boy, the one that always meant he'd understood something deeper than words could say. A month later, he asked Clara to marry him. It wasn't a grand gesture, just the two of them at the lake, under the same sky where he'd once said goodbye. He didn't use Emma's ring, of course. He bought a new one, silver, simple, like a promise made in peace, not pain. When he told me, I cried again, not from sadness, but from the fullness of life coming full circle. He said, "Mom, I think Emma would be happy for me." And I said, "I know she is." On their wedding day, the sun was warm, the air filled with laughter and lilacs. As they exchanged vows, a soft breeze passed through the garden, lifting a single white petal into the air. It landed at Michael's feet, and for a moment, he looked upward and smiled. I knew he felt it too, that quiet blessing from a love that had never truly left. Later, when the guests were dancing and the sky turned gold, I stood alone for a moment, looking at my son, alive, in love, free. I thought about the day I found the ring in his pocket, how it had frightened me, how it had started everything. I realized now that the ring wasn't a reminder of loss. It was a bridge, from one life to another, from sorrow to hope. I whispered a thank you to the universe, to the mysterious nurse, to Emma, to every unseen hand that had helped us reach this day. And as I watched Michael take Clara's hand and lead her to the dance floor, laughter echoing through the garden, I felt something inside me settle completely. Love doesn't die. It transforms. It finds new faces, new laughter, new mornings. And in the end, that's the miracle of it all, that even when the world breaks us, love finds a way to make us whole again. When the spring came, it was like the world itself had decided to breathe again. I remember watching the light spill through Michael's window one morning, golden and quiet, and realizing it didn't hurt as much anymore. The grief was still there, like a scar beneath the skin, but it no longer controlled every heartbeat. Sometimes healing doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It comes softly, disguised as laughter echoing from the kitchen, or a cup of coffee shared without words. Michael had begun going out again. At first, just walks around the lake where he'd let Emma's ring go. Then, volunteering at the library. Then, something else, someone else. Her name was Sophie. I met her one Sunday morning when she knocked on our door, holding a box of muffins and smiling in that careful, kind way people do when they don't want to step on fragile ground. She had eyes like summer water and the patience of someone who knew what loss looked like. "I'm a friend from the library," she'd said, glancing shyly at Michael who stood behind me, pretending not to smile. It was the first time I'd seen him look at someone like that since Emma. Not the same way, of course, not with the same spark of youth and forever, but with something gentler, something wiser. They didn't rush anything. They went for walks, shared stories, and sometimes, when she left, I saw him watch her from the window. I didn't say a word. Some things heal better when left untouched. Weeks passed, then months. The rhythm of life returned, slowly, like music rediscovered. I began tending to my garden again. The roses had almost withered from neglect, but I trimmed, watered, and spoke to them softly like I used to when Michael was a boy. He helped me sometimes, his hands no longer shaking when he held the shears, his smile returning, hesitant at first, then freer. One afternoon, as we worked side by side, he said quietly, "Mom, do you ever think we're allowed to be happy again?" I looked up at him, the sun painting his face in light, and said, "I think happiness never really leaves, sweetheart. It just waits for us to be ready again." He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, he looked like a man no longer haunted. That night, I cried alone, not from sadness, but from relief. Sophie became part of our world, little by little. She'd bring books, laughter, and that sense of calm I hadn't realized we were missing. I watched them grow closer, but also different, less desperate, more rooted in friendship and respect. There were evenings when they'd sit on the porch, talking softly while I pretended to read inside, secretly listening to their voices blend with the sound of crickets. It reminded me of how Emma used to hum, how love can sound different but still mean the same thing. Then came the day I saw Michael standing by the lake again, holding something small in his palm. My heart skipped. For a moment, I feared he'd gone back to old ghosts. But when I approached, he turned, smiling, and showed me a small silver ring, simple, new, engraved with a date I didn't recognize. "It's for Sophie," he said, almost whispering. My eyes filled instantly. "Already?" I asked, half laughing, half trembling. "Not yet," he smiled. "Someday. But this time, I'll wait until she's ready, until we're ready." There was a peace in his tone that told me he'd finally forgiven life for taking Emma away. He'd stopped fighting the past. He'd started living again. That evening, as I stood in the doorway watching him talk to Sophie under the fading sky, I realized something. The ring I'd once found in his pocket had been the end of one story, and the beginning of another. Love doesn't vanish when the person leaves. It changes form, moves through us, makes us braver. I'd spent so long fearing the silence, fearing the memories, but now I understood. Grief is love's echo. And echoes mean something beautiful once existed. Years later, on a quiet summer afternoon, I found myself sitting at that same lake, my hands resting on my lap, the water shimmering like melted glass. Michael and Sophie were nearby, their little daughter, my granddaughter, running barefoot through the grass. She had Emma's eyes, but Sophie's smile. When she ran toward me, giggling, holding a handful of wildflowers, my heart almost burst with gratitude. Life had given us back what it once took, not in the same shape, but in a new, tender form. Sometimes when the breeze moved through the trees, I swore I could hear a whisper, faint, like memory, and I liked to imagine it was Emma. Maybe she was happy for him. Maybe she was the reason Sophie walked into his life at all. Maybe she had sent the ring back, through hands we didn't expect, to tell him it was okay to let go. I'll never know. But what I do know is this: love never ends. It just learns new ways to stay. And whenever I close my eyes, I see it all: the past, the pain, the forgiveness, the laughter, blending together into something whole again. The wedding ring in my son's pocket wasn't a secret to be solved. It was a message from love itself, that even after heartbreak, even after years of emptiness, there's always a way back home. Sometimes I sit by the window at night and watch the streetlights hum against the dark. The world feels quieter now, softer, as if it finally learned how to breathe again after holding its breath for years. Michael and Sophie live just a few blocks away. They call every evening, just to ask how I'm doing, and sometimes their daughter, little Emma, insists on telling me about her day, how she learned to draw a cat, or how her father burned the pancakes again. Every story feels like a small miracle, every laugh like a prayer answered. There was a time when I believed the best parts of our lives were behind us. Now I see how wrong I was. The best parts don't happen all at once. They bloom quietly, in between heartbreaks, like wildflowers growing through cracks in the pavement. Last week, Michael brought me a photo album. He said Sophie had helped him make it. Inside were pictures of the past: Emma, their wedding, moments I had forgotten or was too afraid to remember, and then newer ones: the baby's first steps, their home by the lake, the garden in spring. Between the pages, I found something small pressed flat and shining. It was a dried rose petal, the same kind Emma used to keep in her books. Michael smiled when he saw my eyes fill with tears. "She's still here, Mom," he said softly. "Just in different ways." And he was right. Sometimes when the morning light hits the kitchen window, I still see her shadow there, not haunting us, but blessing us. I think love is like that ring. It travels, disappears, returns, changes shape, but it never truly vanishes. It lives in every small kindness, every shared laugh, every second chance we dare to take. It's in the silence after forgiveness, in the way my son holds his daughter close as if he finally understands how fragile everything is. I used to think finding that ring was a mystery. Now I know it was a gift, a reminder that no love, once given, is ever lost. Sometimes, I walk by the lake alone. The water reflects the sky so perfectly it's hard to tell where one ends and the other begins. I kneel at the edge, dip my hand into the cool surface, and whisper a thank you, to the universe, to the past, to Emma, to whoever or whatever guides us through the hardest storms. Because if I've learned anything, it's that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without breaking. When I stand again, I always look toward the horizon, where the sun begins to rise, painting the water gold. And for a moment, I feel everything: grief, love, time, peace, all blending into one quiet truth. That life goes on. That love returns. And that sometimes, the ring we find isn't just metal. It's a circle reminding us that even endings can be beginnings. It's strange how the years can pass without you noticing the shift in light. One day you wake up and the house feels quieter, the walls softer, the air filled with the scent of morning coffee instead of tears. That's how it happened for me. I didn't plan to grow old peacefully. Grief had once convinced me that peace wasn't made for me. But peace, I learned, doesn't ask for permission. It simply arrives when your heart stops fighting time. Michael and Sophie's little girl, Emma, was 7 now, curious, bright, with a laugh that could melt the hardest winter. Every Sunday, they came for dinner. The sound of her small feet running down the hallway was my favorite melody. She always called, "Grandma, guess what?" And I'd pretend to be shocked, as if I didn't already know she'd bring some tiny adventure from her week, a drawing, a new word, a wildflower picked on the way. One spring afternoon, as we sat in the garden under the pear tree, she asked, "Grandma, do you believe people come back after they go to heaven?" I froze, just for a heartbeat. Sophie looked at me, her smile kind but curious. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" I said softly. "Because I dreamt of a lady," she whispered, twisting her little hands together. She had brown hair and kind eyes. She said to tell Daddy he doesn't have to be sad anymore. I didn't speak for a while. My heart knew before my mind caught up. Emma had never seen a photo of that Emma, her father's first love. But I knew that description. I had seen those eyes. Sophie reached for Michael's hand. He was quiet, staring at our daughter like she had spoken a truth too large for her age. "Sometimes," I said finally, "love visits us in ways we don't understand." Maybe that was someone saying hello. The child smiled, satisfied, and went back to her crayons. But I saw the way Michael looked up at the sky, like he was silently saying thank you. Time became gentle after that. I filled my days with books, my garden, and long walks by the lake. The seasons changed like old friends taking turns keeping me company. Sometimes, when I felt lonely, I went to the community center. They had started art classes for seniors, and though I could barely paint, I enjoyed the laughter, the smell of coffee, the way everyone's stories blended like colors on a canvas. That's where I met Henry. He was quiet, silver-haired, a retired teacher who loved poetry and made the best lemon muffins I'd ever tasted. At first, we just talked about books, gardens, the weather. Nothing more. But one day, after class, he offered to walk me home. The conversation flowed so easily that I forgot to feel guilty for smiling. We began sharing small rituals: coffee on Tuesdays, painting on Thursdays, walks by the lake on Sundays when my family couldn't visit. I told Michael about him one evening. He didn't laugh or tease. He simply smiled and said, "You deserve that, Mom." I didn't realize how much I'd needed to hear those words. It wasn't about romance, not really. It was about being seen again, not as a mother, not as a widow, but as a woman who still had light inside her. Henry never asked about my past, but he somehow understood it. He once said, "Maybe grief isn't something we get over. Maybe it's something that learns to walk beside us, quietly, while life keeps going." I think that's when I began to love him. Years continued to slip by like soft rain. Emma grew into a thoughtful young girl. Michael's hair started to silver at the temples. Sophie and I became closer than I'd ever imagined. Every Christmas, our home filled with laughter and music again. Sometimes Henry joined us, sitting by the fire, reading to little Emma, his voice steady and warm. Watching them together, I often thought how strange and beautiful it was that a heart can hold so many kinds of love at once. The love we've lost, the love we've found, the love we pass down. One evening, as the sun set over the lake, Henry and I sat on the bench where Michael once let go of Emma's ring. The water shimmered gold and quiet. I told Henry the whole story, the ring, the pain, the healing. He listened without interruption, then reached into his coat pocket and handed me a small box. Inside was a simple silver band. "It isn't for promises," he said softly. "Just for gratitude. For finding you, even this late." Tears filled my eyes. I slipped it on, feeling the circle's cool weight, not as a symbol of what was lost, but of what had returned. That night, when I returned home, I placed both rings, Emma's old one and Henry's new one, side by side in a small wooden box. I realized that both told the same story. That love doesn't fade, it transforms. It teaches. It heals. The older I grew, the more I realized that life isn't made of years, but of moments, the ones that catch you off guard, that take your breath away for reasons you can't explain. Sometimes they're loud, sometimes they're quiet, but they're always fleeting. Now, at 73, my house is filled with the ghosts of those moments, laughter echoing down the hallway, the faint smell of Emma's perfume that never quite left my scarf, the sound of little footsteps that once danced across the wooden floor. Little Emma isn't so little anymore. She's 16 now, thoughtful, curious, and endlessly kind. She spends most weekends with me, pretending to help with chores but mostly asking questions about the old days. I love those conversations. They make me feel alive, like every scar in my heart is just another story waiting to be told. Last Saturday, she sat beside me on the porch, her long hair glinting gold in the afternoon light. "Grandma," she asked, "how do you know when love is real?" Her voice was soft, hesitant, like she was afraid of sounding too young to ask such a big question. I smiled. "You don't always," I told her. "But when it's real, it changes you. It doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to make you more yourself." She tilted her head, thinking. "Was your love like that?" I paused. For a moment, I saw every chapter of my life flicker before me. My late husband, who taught me the quiet strength of partnership. Henry, who showed me that hearts can begin again even after years of silence. And the people I had loved and lost along the way. "Yes," I said finally. "Each love I had was real, in its own way. Some stayed, some left, but all of them built who I am." That night, after she went to bed, I opened the old wooden box I kept on my nightstand. Inside, the two rings lay side by side, Emma's silver one, returned to us like a message from heaven, and Henry's, the ring of gratitude. Their shine had faded slightly, but the meaning hadn't. They were my life, captured in two small circles of metal. I ran my finger over them and felt the weight of time, not heavy, but comforting. The next morning, I called Michael and asked if he and Sophie could come by for Sunday dinner. When they arrived, I told them I had something to share. After the meal, I asked Emma to bring the wooden box from my room. She came back holding it carefully, her eyes full of curiosity. I placed it on the table between us. "These rings," I began, "have been through more stories than any of us. They've seen love, loss, hope, and forgiveness. And I think it's time they found a new home." Michael frowned slightly, confused. "Mom, what do you mean?" I smiled. "I mean that love isn't meant to be locked away. It's meant to be passed on." I turned to my granddaughter. "Emma, one day you'll fall in love. Maybe it will be gentle, maybe it will break you a little, but I want you to remember, love always finds its way back if it's true." I opened the box and handed her Emma's old ring, now tied to a thin silk ribbon. "This one," I said, "belonged to the woman your father once loved, the woman who taught him what love really means. Keep it, not as a burden, but as a blessing." Tears shimmered in my son's eyes, but he didn't speak. He just took my hand and squeezed it. Then I turned to Sophie and smiled softly. "And this one," I said, offering Henry's ring, "belongs to you, because you taught me that second chances don't belong only to the young." She tried to protest, but I insisted. Take it. Every time you look at it, remember that even after loss, there can still be laughter, still be warmth, still be home. The room was silent for a long time. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, carrying the smell of lilacs from the garden. And then, slowly, Sophie reached across the table and took my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. That night, after they left, I sat alone on the porch, watching the stars rise one by one. My heart felt full, not the restless, aching kind of full that grief brings, but the peaceful fullness of completion. I realized that I didn't fear the end anymore. My life had been a long, winding story, full of unexpected turns, and I had loved through every single one of them. When the clock struck midnight, I whispered into the quiet, "Thank you for the time, for the people, for the love." And for the first time in many years, I felt Emma's presence beside me, not as a ghost, but as peace itself. I found it on a quiet Sunday morning, the kind of morning where sunlight felt like a gentle blessing. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just sorting through Grandma Clara's jewelry box, the one she used to keep on her dresser beside the framed photo of her wedding day. The air smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Each piece of jewelry had its own story, a brooch she wore to church, a necklace she said was too heavy for her neck, and at the very bottom, a small velvet pouch tied with a faded golden ribbon. My heart skipped a beat before I even opened it. Inside lay a simple gold ring and a folded piece of paper, yellowed at the edges. I don't know why, but as soon as I saw her handwriting, my eyes stung. "For the one who finds this, my heart's last secret." Her voice, written in ink, felt alive. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded the paper. I sat on her bed, the same bed where she used to tell me stories about love and courage when I was little. And then I began to read. She wrote about him, my grandfather, but not as the man I remembered from photographs. She wrote about the boy she first met, the one who slipped a ring into her son's pocket decades ago, the one who taught her that love can survive everything, even silence. She described how she'd found that ring again after years, how it became a symbol of everything she'd lost and everything she'd learned. And then she wrote something that stopped me cold. "If someone finds this after I am gone, know that love never dies. It only changes form. One day, you'll see it, in someone's eyes, in a moment you didn't expect. Don't run from it like I did for too long. Let it in." I pressed the paper to my chest. For a moment, I could almost hear her voice, soft, patient, full of love that didn't fade with age. Later that afternoon, I went for a walk by the old cafe near the river. It was one of her favorite places. The same one she and Grandpa used to visit every Sunday after church. I sat by the window, the same seat she always chose, and ordered her usual, chamomile tea with honey. The world outside looked golden. That's when I noticed him. He was sitting 2 tables away, sketching in a notebook. I wouldn't have paid attention, but when he looked up, I froze. There was something achingly familiar in his expression, that mix of kindness and quiet focus I'd only ever seen in the old photos of Grandpa when he was young. He smiled, almost shyly, and for some reason, I smiled back. He stood up to leave, and as he passed my table, he paused. "Sorry," he said softly, "you dropped this." I looked down. The gold ring had slipped from my bag somehow, resting on the floor between us. He handed it to me carefully, like it was something sacred. Our fingers brushed, and the world seemed to hold its breath. "Beautiful piece," he said. "Old, but it feels like it has a story." I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "It does," I finally whispered. "It's been waiting for the right person to understand it." He smiled again, not a wide smile, but a quiet, knowing one. "Maybe some stories find us," he said, "even when we're not looking." When he left, I felt something strange flutter inside me, the same feeling I imagined Grandma Clara must have felt when she realized love was not something you chase. It's something that arrives when your heart is ready. That night, I placed the ring back into the velvet pouch and tucked it under my pillow. For the first time in years, I dreamt of her, standing by the river, smiling at me, holding Grandpa's hand. And behind her, the man from the cafe. He wasn't saying anything, just watching me with that same soft look that made my heart feel like it had finally come home. A week passed before I saw him again. But somehow, he'd stayed in my mind every day since that morning in the cafe. His face, his voice, the way he said some stories find us. It replayed in quiet moments like a song that refused to fade. I didn't even know his name. Still, something in me felt certain that our paths weren't finished crossing. Grandma would have said, if your heart remembers a stranger, it's because your souls already met. It was a Saturday when it happened. The air was cool, the sky pale blue, the river shimmering like liquid glass. I was walking down the path lined with autumn leaves when I saw him sitting on the bench near the bridge, sketchbook in his lap, pencil moving quickly. My heart stuttered, just once. I almost turned around, but something, perhaps Grandma's invisible hand, made me stop. He looked up and smiled like he'd been expecting me. "You again," he said, standing up. "I was starting to think I'd imagined you." I laughed softly. "Maybe you did." He shook his head. "No. You're too real to be a dream." It was such a simple sentence, yet it melted something inside me. We ended up walking together along the river, talking like old friends who'd just forgotten each other's names for a few years. His name was Noah. He was an architect, recently moved to town after losing his mother. The way he spoke about her, with gentleness, without pity, made me trust him instantly. "I've been coming here to sketch the old bridge," he said. "It's quiet here. Peaceful." "That's why my grandmother loved it too," I replied. "She used to say the river listens." He smiled. "Maybe that's why I come here. To be heard by something that doesn't judge." We walked until the light turned gold and the river caught fire with sunset. And when it was time to leave, neither of us wanted to. He looked at me for a long moment, like he wanted to say something but didn't. Then he asked, "Would you meet me here again next week? Same time?" I nodded, pretending to think about it, though my heart had already answered yes. That evening, I opened Grandma Clara's letter again. Her words shimmered in the lamplight. "Love doesn't end with goodbye. It waits in the quiet corners of our lives, in the people we're meant to find." I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you." The next Saturday, I wore her favorite blue dress, the one she'd always said made my eyes look like summer skies. Noah was already there, holding 2 cups of coffee and a smile that felt like sunrise. We spent hours walking, laughing, sharing pieces of our lives. He told me how he'd once designed a small chapel by the sea but never got to see it finished because his mother fell ill. I told him about Grandma's stories, about the ring, about how I'd found the letter. When I showed him the ring, his expression softened. He touched it lightly with his fingertip, almost reverently. "Strange," he murmured. "My mother had a ring just like that, almost identical." My breath caught. "Really?" He nodded. "She said it was a family heirloom from her mother's side. She never told me the full story, just that it came from a woman who believed love was the strongest thing in the world." We both went silent, the river whispering between us. I didn't know what to say. Coincidence or fate? The air felt suddenly sacred, like we were standing inside a story that had started long before us. As the sun dipped low, Noah turned to me and said softly, "Emma, I don't know what this is yet, but I feel like I've known you longer than a week." I smiled, my heart aching in the most beautiful way. Maybe we're just remembering. That night, I went home and dreamed again of Grandma Clara. She was standing by the river, smiling the same knowing smile she had in my childhood dreams. And this time, beside her stood Noah's mother, 2 women holding hands, their faces shining with peace. The next morning I woke with the same quiet wonder that comes after a vivid dream, the kind that feels like more than imagination. I made tea, opened the curtains, and sunlight spilled across the table where Grandma's letter still lay. I traced her handwriting with my fingertip, thinking of the strange connection Noah and I had uncovered. 2 identical rings, 2 women from another generation who somehow seemed to know each other. I decided to visit the small historical archive on the edge of town. Grandma had once told me she'd worked there briefly after Grandpa's passing. Maybe there was something about her, or about Noah's family, hidden in the old records. The woman at the front desk recognized Clara's name immediately. "Your grandmother catalogued some of the letters we received from local families," she said. "She always added little notes in the margins. We still keep her box." The woman disappeared into the back room and returned with a dusty wooden box marked Private, C.W. My pulse quickened. Inside were dozens of envelopes and a small leather notebook. The top page was dated April 12, 1972. "He never stopped writing, even when the letters came back unopened. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Beneath the note was a stack of faded envelopes, letters from my grandfather, written during the years he'd been away for work. But halfway through the stack was a different handwriting. Softer, looped, careful. The signature made me gasp. Eleanor M. That was Noah's mother's name. I read one of her letters. Dear Clara, I know we only met twice, but I had to tell you, your kindness saved my brother when he thought the world had forgotten him. He carries your words like an anchor. If life were fair, you'd have been family already. My hands trembled. Brother. Noah's mother's brother. My grandfather. It was as if the river itself had carried their story across decades to find us. I sat there for a long time, holding both sets of letters, feeling generations breathing through the paper. That evening, I met Noah by the river again. He saw my face before I spoke. You found something, he said softly. I handed him the envelope with Eleanor's name. His eyes widened as he read. She wrote to your grandmother? She did. They were friends. More than that, our families were connected before we were even born. He sank onto the bench, silent for a long time. The sunset painted his face gold. My mom always said the best things in life circle back, he whispered. I sat beside him. Maybe that's what we are. A circle closing. We watched the river move, slow and endless. Then, without planning it, he took my hand. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It felt like something that had always been meant to happen. His fingers were warm, steady, and when I looked into his eyes, I didn't see coincidence. I saw continuation. Later, walking home under the first stars, I felt Grandma's presence everywhere. In the wind, in the glow of the street lamps, in the small gold ring I now wore around my neck. Her story hadn't ended. It had simply found a new chapter through us. A week later, Noah and I drove to the edge of town, where the trees grew thick and the river bent around an old white house that had once belonged to my grandparents. It stood quietly between seasons, its shutters faded, its porch scattered with leaves. The place had been empty for years, but when I unlocked the door, the air inside smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish, exactly as I remembered. Noah followed me through the hallway, fingers brushing the pictures on the wall, faces smiling from another century. It feels like walking through someone's memory, he murmured. We stopped in the small sitting room by the fireplace. A wooden chest sat under the window, carved with initials, C and J. I had always thought it was just a piece of decoration, but something about the moment made me kneel and open it. Inside were old linens, a stack of photographs, and a small tin box wrapped in lace. The ribbon fell away easily. Inside the tin lay two objects, a folded letter and a photograph of two young people standing by this very river. The woman was my grandmother, unmistakable in her blue dress. Beside her stood a man whose eyes looked exactly like Noah's. My breath caught. He leaned closer, whispering, "That's my grandfather. I've never seen this picture before." The letter was addressed to our future children. My hands shook as I unfolded it. The paper was delicate, but the ink was still strong. If one day you find this, know that love built everything you are. We could not share the years we dreamed of, but we promised the world that our families would meet again when hearts were ready. When that happens, remember us kindly, and live the life we couldn't. Noah's hand covered mine. Neither of us spoke. The house felt alive with quiet joy, as though the walls themselves had been waiting to breathe again. Outside, the river glimmered. We stepped onto the porch, and he turned toward me with that same calm certainty I had felt since the cafe. "Maybe they were right," he said. "Maybe love really doesn't die. It just waits." I smiled through tears. "Then let's not keep it waiting anymore." He kissed me, softly, as though finishing a sentence our grandparents had begun. The wind rose through the trees, carrying the scent of water and wildflowers, and somewhere deep inside I felt a warmth that was not only mine. When we finally pulled apart, he whispered, "You realize we just closed a circle 4 generations wide?" I laughed, wiping my cheeks. "Or opened a new one." We stayed until the stars came, the river whispering below us, 2 stories woven into one. The house by the river became our beginning. We decided not to sell it or even restore it completely. We wanted to keep its age, its memories. Noah drew up small plans to fix the roof, to open more windows so the light could move freely. Every plank we sanded, every nail we set, felt like a conversation with the people who had once dreamed there. On the first morning we spent in the house together, I woke to the sound of the river and the smell of coffee. Noah was standing at the porch railing, sunlight on his shoulders, holding 2 mugs. "For the architect and the archivist," he said, smiling. I took the cup and watched how the light caught in the ring that now hung from my neck. "Do you think they see us?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "I think they're the reason we're here." We worked, we laughed, we filled the rooms with our own small rituals, fresh flowers on the mantel, a notebook by the door where we wrote one thing we were grateful for every day. Slowly the house changed, not into something new, but into something alive again. A year later we were married under the willow tree by the river. It was spring. Everything smelled of rain and blossoms. There were only a few people, our families, some friends, the wind, and the steady hum of water moving toward the sea. My dress was simple. I wore Grandma's locket, and in my palm, I carried the letter that had started it all. Noah's vows were quiet, almost whispered. "We are made of stories that refuse to die. I promise to keep ours alive." Mine were barely louder than the breeze, and I promised to listen when love comes to speak again. When we kissed, I felt the same warmth that had filled this place long before us, the invisible thread tying hands and hearts across time. Years moved the way rivers do, slow at first, then suddenly quick. The house filled with laughter and music, and soon the echo of little feet running through the hallways. Our daughter, Clara Eleanor, had her grandmother's calm eyes and her father's curious hands. She loved to sit by the window where the letters once rested and ask, "Tell me again how the river found us." I told her every time, adding small details as she grew, how one love survived silence, how another was born from memory, how both lived on through her. When Noah would look at me across the table, I saw the same gratitude that lived in my own chest, that we had found each other not through chance, but through generations of faith. We planted a garden by the water, and every spring the first bloom was always white, Clara's favorite color. Sometimes on quiet evenings, I'd sit on the porch with my daughter asleep inside and the ring glinting against my skin. I'd whisper into the night, "We kept our promise." And in the rustle of the willow, in the low hum of the river, I always thought I heard them answer back. The morning after their confession felt like something out of a dream. The air was soft, the light golden, the world hushed as if afraid to disturb what had just begun between them. Camille woke before him, wrapped in his shirt, the faint scent of his skin still on her lips. She stood by the window, watching the sun rise above the sea, and smiled, that fragile, trembling smile of someone who has finally let go of fear. Julian stirred behind her, his hand reaching instinctively for her side of the bed. Empty. For a second, his heart stopped, until he saw her silhouette, radiant against the dawn. "You look like a painting," he murmured. She turned, teasing, "And you look like you need coffee." They laughed. And it felt good, light, real, easy. Something they hadn't known in years. But beneath that laughter, there was something unspoken. The world outside their quiet bubble was still waiting, her past, his future, and the thousand things they hadn't yet dared to face. He walked to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Promise me something," he whispered. "Whatever happens, don't run away again." She tilted her head back against his shoulder. "Only if you promise not to let me." He kissed her hair. "Deal." That day they spent hours just talking. About everything. The regrets, the mistakes, the things they wanted to do differently. It was strange, how 2 broken people could find so much peace in each other's silence. When night fell, they went down to the beach. The sky was painted in deep violets and orange fire. She took off her shoes and let the waves touch her feet. He watched her, not like a man watches a lover, but like someone looking at the rest of his life. "Camille," he said softly. She turned. "If I asked you to stay, would you?" She looked at him for a long moment. The sea wind tangled her hair, her eyes glimmered with something tender, something brave. "If you mean it," she whispered, "I already am." He stepped closer, brushed his thumb across her lips, and kissed her, slowly, deeply, like the world had stopped spinning. The ocean crashed behind them, the stars began to rise, and everything, for that one perfect second, felt infinite. That night, they didn't make promises. They didn't talk about tomorrow. They simply existed, 2 souls that had finally found their way home. And for the first time in years, Camille fell asleep not with fear, not with loneliness, but with love.